Okay, so thanks for listening. Let's start with second presentation, and I would like to tell you about A-Frame and trying to build some games or other applications for A-Frame. So quick question first. Quick question first. Who ever tried VR? Okay, that's a lot of people. Have you tried WebVR or like? Have you tried WebVR? Okay, so it was more or less native. Okay, any VR developers? Oh, that's sweet, dude. Um, okay, so let's talk about that. So as you could probably imagine, there are many devices available on the market that can provide you with VR capabilities, um, starting from a cardboard and ending with some complicated hardware that is worth a lot of dollars, more or less. So the most simple device you can use is the cardboard, which you can just take from a piece of cardboard, as the name says, and build something to which you can put your smartphone in, and this alone is enough to experience VR with your own smartphone. So you basically don't have to build, don't have to buy an expensive hardware to experience VR and web VR. Some of you already took the VR that we had there. If you want to try checking some demos, etc., I still have a few cardboards here. So let's talk about what WebVR is. So it's more or less a bunch of APIs that you can use to render something on a screen or on a device, which will be rendered in stereoscopic view, so you can watch it with your eyes, and it will look like an immersive 3D. And the the good thing about WebVR is that it's the web, so you have the power of the web. If you're a front-end developer or JavaScript programmer, you already know the tools. You already know how to use them, and it's more or less doing exactly the same but in 3D, and like building cool stuff flying around and whatnot. The cool thing about WebVR is that there is a demo called Sehalt in which it was built in a way that can be experienced on various different devices. It doesn't have to be a WebVR headset. You can try the demo on the laptop. You can try it on the smartphone. I can actually launch it. So it's basically more or less just a very simple scene, a fly through above the lake or whatever. So the cool thing about the demo is that I can run it on my laptop and look around with a cursor mouse. I don't have to have a VR headset. I can launch it on my smartphone. It will use the device orientation, so I can look around and try to feel the experience. I can put it in the cardboard, and if my smartphone will have the browser capable of running WebVR, I will be able to experience that on my own smartphone just with the cardboard. So if any of you would like to try that, there is a short link for the Sahel demo. I have some cardboards. Anyone? Okay. Cool. Uh, cool. So it's just a piece of cardboard, so you just put a smartphone here, and it just works out of the box. So that's cool about it. You can buy a very expensive hardware and try the demo and look around inside, but you can try checking the demo or building a demo yourself without the hardware, just using your laptop or your smartphone and using a piece of cardboard to check if it works as you intended it to work. So I mentioned the browser support. The technology is still experimental, so you would need a special build to try that. If you have Chrome on Android, you can already use that on your smartphone. Um, there are funny names like Samsung Internet. Uh, that's pretty new browser, but the team behind it are doing pretty good on implementing cool web stuff. So, and it's really cool to see how people look around inside the VR and like totally forgetting about the outside world. Anyway, so the documentation status, as I mentioned, it's still kind of early. It's still an editor's draft, but there is a lot of work on having the documentation as good as possible and reaching the final version. Um, and it's cool to see that changes are made like the last changes were made like a few days ago or something like that. So it's very actively being developed. There is a website called iswebvrready.org, uh, which redirects to webvr.rocks. Anyway, so you have a nice overview of which devices support which browsers. So you can see if you have a setup that could handle WebVR. It looks pretty decent. It's not that bad. It was worse some time ago, definitely. Okay, so if you want to build an A-frame or WebVR application or game, you definitely have to start with the boilerplate. You have to set up some stuff that is boring, that you don't want to do basically, but you need to have in your application. There are many things to think about. You have to set up lights, the camera, etc. Preload some assets, create the render loop that will render stuff on the screen, etc., etc. I was watching the video from Google I/O from a few days ago where Brandon Jones was showing a demo with WebVR with 3JS, and he had like 100 lines of boilerplate code, which he said is very simple and easy, and you can like start from that. So, well, you don't have to. You can start with A-frame, which will set up all of that in one line of HTML. So basically, having a scene um, will do all the magic, will prepare the scene with the lights and everything, which is really, really cool. So you can instantly try and build some prototypes or demos or whatever. So let's see the cube example. It's being used in many tutorials to see how much code you have to write to have something on the screen. So let's try to think about how many lines of code do we need in A-frame to have something like that? With the light, with the key controls, the button which will take you to the VR mode, etc., more or less. You can, like, I don't know, try and 10 lines of code. Okay, more or less, more, okay. So actually, it's this. So if you like don't check the other 8 lines of code, which is like setting up the HTML document, and if you forget about a scene, you have basically 1 line of code, which is just a cube. So we are setting up the color, the position, and the rotation, and that's basically it. So apart from loading A-frame JavaScript file, we have the scene and the cube, and we can start experimenting immediately. So A-frame is implementing the entity component system. If you did some game dev, you may be familiar with that concept. So A-frame is using entities like a box or a cube, the camera, the light, and everything, which is set up by the A scene. Everything there is an entity. So those entities have components, which you can call attributes. So basically, you can write HTML, which is a entity, and just set some attributes like geometry, material, rotation, etc., etc. And just by writing that, you can create 3D 3D models that that look pretty nice, do something on the screen. And there is a whole registry of components, so you don't have to write them on your own. You can use already existing components. It can be as simple as showing an image in 360 view to more complicated components like handling input or whatever, or trying to implement multiplayer in your A-frame game. So it's really cool to look through the registry and see what other people have built. And the cool thing about that is it's still just JavaScript. You can create your scene in HTML. You can create objects in HTML, but you can also do that in JavaScript. So as A-frame is based on Three.js, you can even go deeper and write your own Three.js components if you know how to do it. So it's really cool that you have that power of deciding if you want to quickly prototype something with HTML, or maybe write something more complicated in JavaScript that will generate more objects. So the next example of shapes, we can also do that in just a few lines of HTML with some attributes. And the cool thing is we can also animate them. So there is the entity A animation, which will do all the magic for us. So we can just set up all the information about how we want to have the component to be animated, and it will out of the box. Of course, we don't have to do that in HTML. We can also do that in JavaScript. So we can have our render function, which will use request animation frame and change the values on our own. So it's really cool. We can check the demo. So we have the scene with the light and everything. The movement is working, and all the shapes are moving on the screen, and all that's everything to do that. So it's like 20 lines of both HTML and JavaScript. So it's really cool to be able to prototype something very quickly and see if our concept works. So I did exactly that. I realized that I wrote some articles that was introducing people to A-frame, but I haven't actually built a game. So out of all the brilliant ideas I had, and other people also did, I decided to build a breakout in 3D because why not? Because I was building a breakout game for the tutorials for MDN, where I wrote about how to build a breakout game in pure JavaScript and then in using Phaser framework. So having no ideas at all, I decided to build a breakout game in A-frame, which resulted in something like that, which is both terrifying and awesome that this is actually, well, if you can call it a game, but that's something that is 3D and it is built by me, and I think it's the first 3D game like something. Uh, so even if I can build something in 3D, like throwing stuff on the scene and pretending it works, then anyone can build something in 3D, which is really awesome because before A-frame, it was really hard to get your head around 3D frameworks to build something because it was very complicated to start working with them. But knowing JavaScript and doing some front-end work, you can actually build something in 3D having no experience at all. So I can imagine most of you, if not all, could build something more complicated and more funny than this. But it works. I mean, well, it's not working exactly, like it's not moving yet, but still, uh, let's call it a prototype. And by just throwing stuff on the screen, you can build something that looks like a game. Uh, yeah, so the source code is messy, but it kind of works. I just have to, implement everything else that is missing, but it's almost finished, like always. So the cool thing about A-frame, you can build it inside your editor. You can just move something on the screen, and you can, like me, see if the value you are changing is the X or Y or Z, or are you messing up and you're moving different object. So instead of trying and experimenting and refreshing and seeing what happens, you can use something called the A-frame inspector, which looks really cool and is already in the browser. So you can launch it by pressing Ctrl Alt and I. So let's try that. So the cool thing is you will see your scene. You can look around and you have control over everything on the scene. On the left, you can see all the components. So even though the camera wasn't set up by me, it's still there. A scene did it automatically. So I can take that camera and do with it whatever I want. I can see the boxes, which represents something, probably. Uh, yeah, I can remove the bricks. I can throw them in the air. So um, I wanted to build something that would show you how easy it is to mess with it. Like I was thinking about having a huge red button with the text below it. Don't press the button. And when you press it, the gravity would start working and everything would just fall on the ground, for example. or if you start playing the breakout, you could throw balls into the bricks or something like that. So it's really cool that you can quickly experiment with the prototype and see if the concept works. So to have some inspiration, it's cool to see other projects people are working on. There's a load of them on the A-Frame website. To name a few, there is an application called A Painter, which is really cool because you can paint in 3D. And even though it sounds strange, watching people paint something in 3D, even though they haven't painted anything at all in their whole lives, is really cool. So when we were demoing something at a conference, people were like looking at that and maybe laughing a little bit and like, okay, that's kind of silly. But it was really cool to see people like 10 minutes later laying on the ground because they have to paint it from the bottom. And they really painted some really cool stuff. So even though you have no talent at all, you can paint. And it's really cool to see the effects of random people trying WebVR for the first time. But if you don't want to paint and you want to shoot at things, there is the A-Blast, which is really cool. It was built by the A-Frame team, and you can just shoot at the emojis, I think, which is also really cool. The latest experiment is the Saturday night demo in which your movement in VR, in WebVR, can be tracked. So you can record yourself dancing to the music and then play it to someone else or watch someone else dancing to the music. Sounds strange, but it's really exciting, especially if you hear the music actually. So I recommend trying that out. There are other demos or other applications and things that are experimenting with WebVR. There was the Journey to Mars application in which you could be there on Mars and just look around and see how the Curiosity was behaving there all alone, strangely. So there is also the City Builder demo in which, as you can see, you can build a city, or you can throw that stuff in any direction and pretend it's not you or whatever. But there are also other experiments. It's not only about games, it's also about, for example, data visualization. So you can try and build something with that and bring boring statistics to life. There are also tries to have augmented reality inside virtual reality or mixing both, so you can actually have augmented reality with A-Frame, which works in virtual reality. Anyway, it works. So you can absolutely try that. And I can recommend checking out something called A Week of A-Frame, which the A-Frame team do. They are posting links to interesting resources and demos and stuff every week on their blog. So it's nice to see how what can be achieved, what can be created with a given technology. I can mention what I learned during demoing A-Frame at various conferences. So the thing is, VR is a new medium. it's a totally new experience in which you have to consider new input. Like first demos were using keyboard and mouse, which were like absolutely not meant for that. Then it was before the hardware had the hand controls. People were like experimenting with the gamepad API, with the lip motion, etc. You can use device orientation. So if you design something, you have to think about a brand new input. You have to think about UI and UX, and something as simple as using links on URLs on normal websites was something to discuss about in the community, because how do you traverse from one reality to the other? How do you control that? How do you activate that? Is it like a portal or what? So it's interesting that uh, you can talk with others about solving some problems that later on will be taken as granted and will be used by millions of other developers. So I think it's a good time to jump in and build especially for that. The thing to consider is people may react strange to virtual reality. I remember the first ever demo that was created for VR was the roller coaster. And strangely enough, 9 out of 10 people was getting sick and like throwing up. So right now, it's obvious that you you're trying to keep high frame rate, but you don't move the camera. You give that to the user or to the player, so they can move the camera freely. You don't shake that, you don't change the perspective, you don't change the horizon, because I'm almost exactly sure that people will have some problems with that. The interesting outcome at one experiment was that if the developers implemented, like showed something that was looking like a nose on the screen, even though it was just like a rectangle or whatever, people were familiarizing that with their own nose, and the brain was working better, and less people did get the sickness. So it was an interesting outcome that adding a virtual nose solves some of your problems. You can't make that up. It's like you can't, absolutely. The next thing is virtual reality is have a view of 360 degrees. So when we were showcasing a few demos, people were standing or sitting and looking in front of them. Maybe they were looking on the sides, but we had to tell them explicitly that something is happening behind them. And after that, instead of like sitting, yeah, it's cool, yeah, cool. After that, when they were flying on a drone, it was more like, wow, whoa, dude, I'm flying, yay! So it was really cool to see people really enjoying and looking around in 360 and checking all the details. In every next situations, they immediately were looking around in every possible direction, because there were things happening above or below or behind them, etc., etc. So it was good to mention that at the beginning, and then when they learned, it was natural for them. So one thing we learned was that you don't need a good graphics. You even don't need a good gameplay, because the feeling of being inside something was the most important thing, because we had a demo which was using leap motion, so it was detecting the people's hands. So even though there was this ugly low poly face which didn't look real inside a ugly box, sorry to the developers that created the demo, it was interesting to see that when people tried that and it was working smoothly and they were playing with the face, and it was having those perfect 90 frames per second, it was more real and more immersive than any previous demo, because you felt being inside, which is the most important thing. Um, so in previous demos, people were like watching the 360 videos. After a few minutes, was like, okay, thanks, it was cool. So with this demo, it was more like people started playing with that, and after 10 minutes or so, we had to tell them, yeah, okay, so there is a huge line. Everybody want to try that too. Um, so if you really stuck there and you're feeling inside, you're totally and absolutely forgetting about the outside world, which is, I think, the thing that you have to achieve in your game or application. So people totally forget about the outside world. And while we didn't have we didn't have on the screen, we weren't showing what people were seeing. It was also cool to watch at other people standing in line, that somebody's standing or sitting and playing with something, which is the face, and like totally forgetting about everything else. So you have to like, okay, it's enough, let's move on. So I think that is the most important thing, to have someone feel being inside and totally forget about the outside world. So if you're interested, there is of course a few interesting websites, with the aframe.io being the most interesting one. The last one is a tutorial built by me, which you can check, which showcase the shapes that you were seeing previously. And I would like to see what you can build with that technology, because there are still room for innovation and for cool ideas and for really cool games, because there's still only a few technical experiments. We are really missing content here. So if you build something for virtual reality with A-Frame, please let me know, so we can share it with the community, and maybe somebody will build some cool game that he will earn a lot of money on that, or be famous and whatever. That would be really cool. So I encourage you to do that. And that's it. Thank you. You can check the slides online if you want. Are there any questions? Yes.
You have shown like a tool, like I don't know, it was a shortcut of Control Alt I or something, and it allowed you to dynamically edit particular components or shapes. And my question is it more like Chrome DevTools, or is it more like built-in editors? So if I change the, I don't know, maybe one polygon or something, is this change will be saved, or is it temporarily like in Chrome DevTools?
I'd say it's well, it's more like Firefox DevTools, but yeah, it's temporary. It's something you can experiment with. But if you refresh the website, it will return to the previous state. So it's more like a debugger rather than editor. So you can try and experiment and see if you can like move something, how the variables will change,
Okay,
etc.
and is there any some kind like editor like that? Like I don't know, maybe like what you see is what you
Yeah,
get.
I mean, I remember there were someone working on that. I'm not exactly sure if it was finished, but somebody was definitely working on the editor.
Okay.
And I think it should be available if you Google for that or look through the registry of the components or just on the website.
Okay,
I
thank you.
think it somebody already did that. It
Thank
should work at least as a prototype. Yeah, Plushy. Yay. Okay.
Too many questions.
Yeah, more questions.
Hi. So let's suppose that I work for an e-commerce website and I want to sell stuff in 3D, like
Close.
for example, yeah, clothes. For example, yes, I saw that demo.
Okay.
No,
Never
no,
mind.
yeah, you can show it. You can show it so they know
It
what
was
I'm talking
called
about.
a frame.
Yeah, a frame
Something.
clothes 3D demo,
Yeah.
something. So the question is, do you know that if there is something out there to make it possible to take a picture of a model in 3D and have it
Yeah.
in some format
Well,
that I can render in 3D?
like a screenshot or
Like a 3D scanner picture, not only scanner,
but as a flat image or as
as a 3D
3D.
yeah, as a 3D
Well, that's the
model
question. Model.
with colors taken from the model wearing the dress.
Mm,
It exists? Okay, so he's
yeah.
Italian. He can speak to me later.
Yeah,
Okay.
definitely. I mean, yeah, you saw the demo when you could like watch somebody could change the clothes on the model. So yeah, it exists. That's cool. That's cool to know
That's interesting.
that it is. Plushy. Oh, sorry. Any more questions? Yep.
So you talked about a number of different devices like the browser, the desktop browser, mobile devices. But what about the major devices like Oculus, Vive, or I've seen a demo that there was some controller action. So is there already compatibility or and overarching compatibility over these devices?
Yes,
Or what's the
absolutely.
stand on that?
The demos, the latest demos like A Blast or a Saturday Night are using the hand controllers of HTC Vive or Oculus Rift to record the position or like a painter. For a painter, you have to have hand controllers. So you can try it with HTC Vive or Oculus. You can see something that was created inside the cardboard, but you obviously can't paint anything in cardboard using only cardboard. So there are plenty of demos harnessing the power of the HTC Vive for Oculus and using the hand controllers to build something cool.
So am I correct assuming that each of these controllers and also like the Leap controller you showed or the Daydream controller can access this global API and just supply the movement info? So,
Yeah, well, I mean, I showed this held demo, which is progressively enhanced, so it can work on your laptop, on your smartphone. It can work on any of the hardware like Vive or Oculus. So yeah, you can you can build, if that was the question, you can build for any of the platform. You can harness the power of the more powerful hardware or using the hand controllers, but you don't have to.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, cool. Flashy. Cool. Any more questions? Yep.
So I think that everyone is thinking about the fact how good you need to how good your hardware need to be in order to run the VR properly. Like there should be like 90 frames per second constantly
Yeah.
in order not to get sick. So uh, is it widely supported? Like I don't know, on any Android or Apple phone I can use it, or should it be desktop?
It depends on the demo or game you want to run, because it would be great to have 90 frames per second on every of the two eyes of the screens. So it would be nice to have a powerful hardware. If you have the Razer MacBook, Razer laptop for like $3,000 or whatever, it would run everything very smooth. But you can actually run simpler demos on an older smartphone, and it will work. If you have the browser that will handle it, it really depends on the demo. You want to run more complicated demos or games, but Health is a really cool experiment that you can run on basically anything, and it will just work because it's so simple and it don't need much resources. So I would say it depends on the game or demo you want to build.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, you can try that. Yeah. I highly recommend that. If you haven't tried VR, it will be really awesome. Any more questions? Yep.
Is there any access to the device's camera and with A-frame so I can, fake some augmented reality?
Uh, I suppose yes, and I think it's not for it's not depending on the A-frame specifically. If you can access the camera API, you can do it and you can use it inside A-frame. Uh, if the augmented reality, the AR.js works, it have to use a camera, so it have to be possible somehow. Flashy? Another one. I have the different one. Yeah? Okay, cool. Any more questions? Okay, if you'll have any more questions to me, I will be here around for some time, so you can just bump into me and ask me anything. Thank you.